All right, the second part of this lesson was solving a quadratic by factoring. Now there's two main differences or two main types of factoring. You have what I call the easy type, where your leading coefficient is 1. Then you have the harder type, where you have anything other than 1 as your leading coefficient. So let's look at number 9 here, the easier type first. When your leading coefficient is just 1, then all you have to do is take the last number and list off the factors. Now, obviously, it looks like I picked an easy one. It's just 2, so the only factors of 2 would just be 2 times 1. So what we need to figure out now is what combination of 2 and 1 will give us negative 3 in the middle. So if it's a negative 3 is what we need when we add together, but positive 2 is what we need when we multiply together, both of these will end up being negative. So our factors will be x minus 2 and x minus 1. So there's my two factors. Take both of those, set them equal to 0. So x minus 2 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, and solve both of these. So you add the 2 over on the first one, you get x equals 2. And you add the 1 over on the second one, you get x equals 1. So there are your two answers. And if you want to get fancy, you can put the little brackets around it, and your answers would be 2 and 1. All right, so now let's look at one that's a little bit more complicated. On this one, we have a leading coefficient that's 4. So when you have your leading coefficient is greater than 1, you take the first one and the last one and you multiply them together. We're going to do factor by grouping. So first we're going to start off with 4 times negative 6, and that gives us negative 24. Now that's the number we're going to factor out now. Now again, if you already know your factors, if you already know what factors you need to get this middle number, then you don't have to list them off. But I'm going to list them off just so we know what's going on. So first up, we have 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, 5 won't go into it, and then we wrap back around to 6. So once you wrap back around, you don't have to go through all these numbers again. So there's my 4 factors. Now we're going to figure out what combination of these factors will give us 5 in the middle. But one of them needs to be negative. To get this negative 24, one of these need to be negative. So what I like to do is just go down one side of my factors and just put negatives in them. Then I start adding them together to see what combination will give me positive 5. So negative 1 plus 24, that'd be 23. Negative 2 plus 12, that would be 10. Negative 3 plus 8 would be 5. So that is what we need. So here are my two factors. Now, if you were doing the easier type over here, like on number 9, you would be done at this point. Those would be your factors. But because my leading coefficient is greater than 1, I now use those two and replace the middle number with those. So what I get is 4x squared plus 8x minus 3x minus 6. And you'll notice when I put these in, I put the 8 first and the 3 second. It does not matter the order you put these in. I put them like this because the next step is you group the first two and last two together. So the reason I put the 8 here is so I could put it with the 4. Those would factor better together. Same thing with 3 and 6. Those factor better together. So I put them beside the ones that they would factor easiest with. Now you group the first two together, group the last two together, and factor out what they have in common. So what do 4x squared and 8x have in common? 4, so we'll pull a 4 out, and then they also have an x in common. So we pull a 4x out, and then we write back what's left over. So if we pull a 4x out of the 4x squared, all that's left is an x. And if we pull a 4x from 8x, all we're left with is 2. All right, next, we do negative 3x minus 6. Now, I don't know if this came up in class any, but we are going to pull out a negative here because they both have negatives. But even if they don't, you always pull out a negative if the first one is negative. It makes your math work out better. So we have negative 3x minus 6. So we can pull out a negative 3. That's what they have in common. And we're left with x plus 2 is what's left over. And so whenever you do factor by grouping, after you pull out what they have in common, your two parentheses should be the same, which they are for this one. So I take what I pulled out, that's my first factor, 4x minus 3, and then whatever's inside the parentheses is your second factor. So there's your two factors. Now take both of them, set them equal to 0, and solve your equation. So for the first one, we add 3 over. We get 4x equals 3. Then we divide by 4. And we get x equals 3/4. For the second one, we subtract 2 over. And we get x equals negative 2. So your two answers for this quadratic would be 3/4 and negative 2. So that's how you solve by factoring, the easy type and the harder type. So next up would be solving quadratics with the quadratic formula.